Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Search with Candour. I am Jack Chambers Ward and I'm joined by a very special guest in the studio here at Candour. She is our strategy director here at Candour and the biggest Sabrina Carpenter fan I know. Welcome, Jessica Bettis.
Hello. Thank
Hello,
you for
hello.
having me and for my Sabrina Carpenter introduction.
It's lovely to have you on. I know you and I have been talking about this for a very long time.
We have.
I know Mark Williams-Cook has sat in that chair many times, and I'm trying to have more people from Candour on the show going forward. So I'm very, very happy to have you here. And we're going to get into a lot of the client partnership side of things.
Yep.
Which I think is an interesting thing for a lot of us. Obviously, the majority of our audience are SEO professionals and stuff, right? But I also want to touch on a lot of the, I think people use the phrase soft skills. I don't know how you feel about that phrase. I find it a bit annoying, but I kind of get why it's that versus hard skills, right? From your kind of perspective, and I want to get into client partnership, account management, and what that means for us as, team members in an agency side, working with clients and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to dig into some account management stuff, which I feel like I have very lightly touched on in the past with previous guests, but never gotten into, which I'm excited to get into.
Yeah, let's do
it. Let's do it. So we're going to kick things off, I think, talking about the kind of traits you would hope for and look for in a successful partnership between a specialist in the team and one of the account management and client partnership teams.
Yes. The important collaboration.
Exactly right.
And the thing that drives the benefit for the client. My favorite thing about working with a specialist, my sort of favorite quality is an openness to context. So what I mean by that is the time and considerations for things like priorities, commercial constraints, brand, all of those things, an openness to that context, learning about business goals, business requirements, and ultimately why that matters to the work that they're doing, the data that they're gathering, how they frame it. That is key for me. If you can keep that kind of commercial awareness, that client awareness in mind when you're framing results, looking for that's perfect. And I think on the other side of that, I think from a client partnership, the most important quality is trust in your specialist. So we don't need to know how to do all of your work. It's not about two people trying to do the same job and replicate each other's work, but it's like trust in that. So I might not understand the depth of the technical work that you're going to carry out or the keyword research you're going to do, but I trust that it's right because I believe in your work. I know that you're an expertise and I champion that and I want my client to believe it as well. So that kind of mutual respect for each other's skills and what we're bringing is the foundation of like a really solid partnership in my view.
Yeah, definitely. I think, and you and I have worked on accounts together before, right? And I think there is a real kind of brilliant, to use a very corporate word, the synergy between the specialist and the client partner, where it comes to, like you said, understanding where strengths and weaknesses are with different team members.
Yeah.
And I think huge credit to what you've done with the account management team and the client partnership team here, where there is so much, respect on both sides. And I think that is a thing a lot I'm sure you have experience in previous jobs as well, seen other agencies and heard stories from other people in the industry where, the client partnership team doesn't get the respect it deserves and doesn't get that credit and doesn't, actually get involved in things because the specialists are like, oh no, I want to hoard all my information. I want to take all the credit for all the work or something like that. But it is an entirely separate skill set, right?
It is. Yeah. That goes both ways, I think, if you don't understand each other's roles. So yes, there is I think it's quite common that account management and client facing role, the kind of skills associated with that do get overlooked. And that is a bugbear, as you know, because I talk to you about it a lot and I talk about it internally a lot and I really champion our role and the value we can bring. But yeah, the flip side of that is like client facing roles, account manager roles can also be as difficult to work with as specialists. So if you don't trust in the expertise and you don't understand the expertise, that's how you end up in situations where you get, can you just do that quicker? Could you just do a bit of quick research? Is it that hard? Why would they pay for that? And you embody some of those red flags that difficult clients have. So it does go both ways. And obviously, the client facing, the account management stuff is a bit kind of closer to me, and it's something I feel a bit more passionate about. But I do recognize that we can be guilty of that as well. So that's why that that collaboration is so important, that respect of each other's skill sets, and making sure that we are really aligned before we're going out to a client.
Yeah, definitely. I think especially when you're literally on a call with a client, in those moments of, almost passing the buck back and forth between the technical lead and the content lead and the account lead and whoever's like driving that conversation, then handing it over to, have a broader strategic perspective. And I think that's what the guys here do so well, is having that, like you said, the commercial perspective being such an important part of that. And exactly as you were saying there, us as SEO specialists or the digital PR team or even the development and designers, whoever it is, we have to be focused on doing the work and focusing on that kind of thing. You often don't have time to get into a full commercial review and understand business goals of clients and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is such a, I guess, like underrepresented or underappreciated thing, where it can be the difference between something in theory, like, the same strategy working for one client and completely not working for another client, is understanding what's actually the goal here. What's the plan? Like, what does the client want from us at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I see that as like a really big part of my goal, is really just defining what success looks like and then creating a plan that captures that, how we'll get there, and making sure that everybody can execute it. So we're all driving towards the same goal. And that's, that's such an important thing to have, so that we all know the direction that we're moving in.
I love when I first joined Candour, there was I can't remember how we worded it exactly, like brief in a nutshell thing of like being part of annual reviews and stuff like that. And because I find, the way my brain works, I'm very much like small details and very much not often focused on the bigger picture. So having that reminder pop up and be like, this isn't about traffic, this is about leads, or this is about revenue, not about impressions, right? Or whatever it is, actually having a focus and a driving thing. I know you and I worked on an e-commerce client a few years ago, and it was so driven by revenue. I was like, yeah, cool, we can do all this stuff that brings traffic and all that kind of stuff. You need to be thinking about the commercial impact of all of this. What is the commercial framing of your content? What is the commercial framing of optimizing a landing page or whatever it is? You can write all this lovely blog content all day long. Is that driving the right kind of leads and the right kind of thing, right? And I'd like I said, working with you and understanding what the other guys here were doing as well, is understanding that perspective, keeping that in mind. And I think I know you use the term like championing the client, right? And being that representative, even when the client isn't here in the room. And I guess it also goes the other way if you're having a conversation with a client, because again, something I've never seen as a specialist, I assume there's a million extra emails and calls and conversations that are happening between the client partner and the client. You're also representing the specialist in that way as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we'll make sure that their needs are heard as well. I've often had like pushback. So we want to do this by this day, or we want to achieve this. Can we just cut this bit out? And I will have to say, I'm just speaking for our SEO lead here, just speaking for Brendan, or just speaking for Jack. Actually, there's a reason that we need that time. And for us to get to, point A, we need to do this research. So yeah, we are representing the needs of the specialists as well. But I think, I guess that's kind of where that really important dynamic comes together, because the client partner or the account strategist, whatever you want to kind of call that role, is really thinking about where we want to be and keeping all of that long-term vision, that business context. And what we're trying to do is make sure that all of the work connects to the business case. Like, what's the business impact? Why does it matter? We're thinking about that. And the perfect collaboration is when you get a specialist that comes along and goes, okay, that's where we want to be. This is how we get there. And it's those like marrying those two steps up together that gives you like a plan. And I think it's a hard thing for one person to do all of that and keep all of that in mind. To your point about all of the emails and the calls and those kind of things that happen, there's so much work that goes into nurturing a relationship, building trust, making sure our client can kind of come to us, ask those questions that they're not sure if they're silly questions, or, when they're facing pressure internally from their management, their leadership team, to be able to come to us and validate that. I think that's a really important part, that just realistically to try and fit all of that into your workload whilst also doing really like detailed, deep focused kind of research tasks and SEO tasks, it's really hard for one person to have all of those skills and find the time and then even be able to package that up and sell that in a way. That's so hard to do that in a realistic time frame. And I think that's why having the two different skill sets that complement each other is so valuable for the client.
Yeah, I think that's something I don't envy freelancers doing, right? Like, I think that's a big reason of why I've never done freelance work, even like outside of my day job and stuff. It's just like, I can't imagine handling all of that extra information and understanding commercial perspective, doing all of the background information that doesn't get thought about or mentioned until you realize, oh, this is a lot of work. Oh God, now I have 5 different jobs to do. You realize like how busy you guys are in the client partnership side of things. And I want to pick up on something you said there as well. Like, how do you go about that? I guess building that rapport, that trust, that relationship with the client. For me, that's always been something, again, as you know, having seen me in the office, see me speak, see me on the podcast, like on client calls, I'm kind of the same. I'm podcast Jack is also kind of client call Jack, and you've been on calls with us where it basically turns into a podcast halfway through. They're like, so how's Google doing at the moment? I'm like, oh no, here we go. Like, so the latest Google update is this, and it's like, I'm just reading core updates at you at this point. Like, how do you go about building that relationship with the client, and have that? You mentioned trust earlier, right? And have that trust is earned. It's not just given straight away. Like, how do you go about getting the right specialist and the right account manager in with the right client and making sure they're all syncing up? Obviously, you're, from director of strategy perspective, you're overseeing the whole thing, right? So is there a kind of conscious decision to not only think about who would be best for the project, but who is going to be, oh, this guy seems really chatty, he might like Jack, or he seems more focused in this way, he might prefer working with Brendan or Tom or whatever?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely do consider people's background and personality types and things like that. So I know Sammy, our senior account manager, I know her background really well. I know the types of clients that she's worked on. So same with Elliot, same with Hannah. And we have our own kind of personalities. And when we have those clients that feel a little bit more like they respect maybe a bit more of an informal relationship, they want all of that chatter pre-call, they want it to turn into a podcast. Like, I know the right account manager for that, but I also know, actually, again, using Sammy as an example, she's got 10 years in experience and she's worked a lot with software clients, she's worked with a lot of financial clients. So actually, if we get a client in from an industry where regulatory guidance, compliance, all of those kind of things are really key, I know I've got a person on the team who's going to be able to navigate that. So I do think about their kind of skill set and experience, but yeah, personality absolutely comes into it. Yeah, when we're speaking to clients at proposal stage, we have I have some questions in there that sometimes kind of feel a bit like fillery, but it's really me kind of trying to get a bit of a vibe check of, what do your workflows look like? What do resources look like? Who do you report to and in what format, and who's going to work best for you? And I will try and kind of match that. And I think we've got that really well.
Yeah, resource management, I think, is another thing that gets underappreciated as well, right? Because I've encountered it so many times before where, sure, you could write, 10 more briefs a month. I was like, who's writing those briefs?
Yeah.
Like, they don't have the client doesn't have a marketing person on the team who is going to be able to spend all of their time doing that.
Yeah.
So you can produce all of their work. It can be great. It can be high quality, whatever. But if they're not able to do that, and you don't understand that at the early stage, like you said, from a strategic perspective, how do you then know, cool, we can drive lots more revenue if you did this? Like, we can't do that.
Yeah.
We don't have the ability to do that. So
yeah.
there's no point in suggesting that as a strategy, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. That, the kind of commercial realities, resources, blockers, how it all comes together is like very much front of mind with client partnership role. And it's not to say that specialists can't do it and that freelancers can't do it. Of course they can. It works really well. But speaking about what works for us, I think there's a real benefit in having somebody separate owning that. Like, one of the things that the account managers will keep in mind here is that for some of our clients, we're not even 10% of their workload. They have so much to do. But that can be maybe a bit more challenging to keep in mind when you're a specialist, because it's a really big part of your workload and it is everything to you, and you care about that, and that can be like, of the working month, that can be 3 weeks out of your schedule. So it is it's 70-80% of your workload and 10% to the client, and that can feel a bit jarring. And I think having a really good client partner that's saying it is really important, really validate that, but what I'm going to do with all of that amazing work is just condense it in a way that I know my client's going to be able to get it around all of their other priorities, because I know they do this on a Wednesday and I know they have to do that report later on in the month. Helping clients understand the work, fit it into their schedule, get buy-in. I think that, there's a real advantage having a CP kind of own that separately. Not to say it can't work otherwise, of course, like I say, but that's a dynamic, that kind of collaboration that I think really works well here.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like, even thinking about, like you said, how much of, say we have an SEO retainer with a client, you're also not factoring in all of their other marketing channels into that. How much email are they doing? How much paid are they doing? All this other kind of stuff. And you're totally right. You can totally get into, as a specialist, totally been guilty of this in the past, being like, this is life and death. This is the be all end all. I have spent weeks honing and crafting and pouring blood, sweat and tears into this keyword research thing or whatever it is, or this technical audit. And the client's like, cool, yeah. Oh, okay. That was my livelihood. That was my baby. That was and you just throw it away. It's like, yeah, you kind of need to understand the perspective of like, oh, you're working with a multinational, international, huge corporation, and you're speaking to the UK marketing manager, who is one tiny little slice of the huge side of things. Like, it can really put things into perspective, right?
It really can. Yeah, having that that perspective of where we fit in the bigger picture and how much influence we have is really important. And again, I think that's like a benefit of having a client partnership role. I think it's really interesting as well when you work in like regulated industries, because when you're doing that like hands-on work, so you're the SEO, the digital PR, and you're looking and you're like, you just changed this wording on this page. It would perform so much better. I just want to put this one thing and I just want to target this one thing. I just want to emphasize this one claim. And we're sitting there like, oh, we did regs training. We know that's not going to get through. That's not going to. And we have that understanding of why it's really difficult. And we can help, because we know that we're in the building. We can kind of help make trade-offs. And before it even gets to client of, you're not going to be able to say that. Regs will never sign that off, or they're off, even if it's not a regulated industry, but from like a brand point of view, I know that doesn't meet their brand guidelines. But if we shaped it like this, and we can get it to a point that actually it works, as in, it's ticking that SEO or that digital PR kind of need, but it's also meeting brand, we can have those negotiations before it even reaches the client. So when it reaches them, and we are 5% of their workload, is quicker. We get the sign off, it's done. And that's another kind of real life example of the kind of negotiating and that advocacy for client that we're doing in real time. And maybe, to the point that you were making earlier about like soft skills and skills that gets overlooked, maybe part of that is driven by the fact that this stuff happens and the client never even knows. Like, when it works so well, they quite often, they'll feel the benefit of it, but they won't see all the work that went into it. So yeah, I guess then when you're saying, oh, we need all of this kind of account management and client partnership time, they're like, why? What would that be needed for? Because it just happens behind the scenes and it gets better outcomes quicker. But yeah, it's harder to feel it. It's not like we can kind of go through and say, well, we made all these kind of negotiations and trade-offs and we shaped all of this work, and that you can't break that down in the same way that you can break down, here's how I approached an audit. It's not the same
Yeah,
thing.
definitely.
But they both still drive value.
I think that's a really interesting point. Like, I'm thinking about all the stuff that, like, I think of it in like, movie production terms. You don't notice film editing 99% of the time, and then there's a weird edit or a bad choice. Like, I just noticed that.
They left a Starbucks cup in.
Yeah, exactly. Or even like, and Mark hates me when I do this, but the film Bohemian Rhapsody drives me absolutely up the wall.
Why?
Because of the edits that they like. There was a contractual thing for the members of Queen where each one had to have a certain amount of screen time.
Okay.
I will send you. It's the
Please
clip
do.
where Aidan Gillen's character comes in and sits with them at the table outside the pub, and like time freezes in order for each member of Queen to react to him walking over. So he like walks over, he pauses, then they all go like, oh, oh, turn, like each member you get. And then Aidan Gillen hasn't sat down yet. So he's just been stood silently, awkwardly, while everyone watches Freddie Mercury. It's like, it's so weird and so like feels so alien and inhuman that 99% of the time, we're going to talk about movies later on, I know, but like you don't think about film editing 99% of the time. Most people can't name a film editor, right? But it's such an integral part of that process. Editing, and so many people say films are made in the edit. Like fundamentally, you can change the tone, the structure, obviously the runtime. Literally, like, is it a 3-hour movie or a 2-hour movie? That's the difference between some people seeing it and not seeing it, and that can make a huge impact. And I think things like account management and all the stuff that goes on seemingly behind the scenes while you're focused on, the movie stars or the director in keeping with the sort of tenuous movie analogy here. Imagine, the specialists are the actors on screen. You're seeing their work, but actually there's editors and camera and assistant directors and all this stuff going on behind the scenes where that is the stuff that actually makes the movie happen. And I think, again, not to stretch this analogy too far, that's a lot of what happens when it comes to, huge projects or ongoing retainers and stuff like that. What you guys do with the strategic side of things, with the relationship side of things, I think goes unsung, but is kind of like, I don't know, unknowingly appreciated, I guess. Like clients are already aware of it, but just don't really think about, like you said, why are you bullying for account management time? It's like, because that's quite an important part of it. Like,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it really is. And it's just hard for one person to wear all of those hats, to resource themselves, to prioritize when it's all of like, how do you prioritize when all the jobs sit on your plate, And again, I know that can be done. I know freelancers do that fantastically. So I'm speaking very much about my experience and how this works in context of agency. And it's really hard to wear all of those hats, plan all the things, make the decisions, have the difficult conversations. I think clients need, and clients need that time away, I think, to speak to a client, like a client partnership or an account manager sometimes as well, because it can be, not all times, and especially here, because our specialists are lovely and very approachable, but they are experts. They know a lot of stuff. They're very intelligent. We wheel them out and say, look at all of this great research, really buy into this. And some of our clients, again, especially when they're time poor or they have like a broader marketing responsibility and it's not their specialism, it's not uncommon for a client in the moment to sign it off and then sideline me and go, I don't know if I really understood that. Like, is that how, or I got it and I believe in it, but I don't understand it enough where I could then explain it to my manager. And I think, or, I kind of get that, but I don't know how I'm going to get the business case for it. And I just really don't want to offend I don't want to offend Jack, how can we make that work? Can you explain it to me again? And I think that that separate point of contact to help negotiate, explain things, it feels like a safe space that you can, kind of hash these things out. Again, like commercial conversations about budgets. When I have had difficult conversations where clients have had to cut budget, or the other way, where they want to spend more. That can feel a little bit awkward talking in an agency setting where you're talking about what is effectively the specialist role of like, how could we maybe reduce this, or how could we scale this up to you, the person doing the work? That can feel a bit complicated. So again, that's why it's like a really nice thing to have a client partner where they can ring up and go, I really need to shift some hours around. And you're not talking to the person whose job it is. I don't know how you make those kind of trade-offs while you're delivering the work. It's your work that they're talking about. You're giving that. It's a lot to ask of one person. And we already ask a lot of our specialists. We ask them to be experts in SEO, but also in communication, because we help them shape that, their work, of course, but they have to be able to explain it to us, and we're there representing the client. We're asking them to put together outputs that look nice, they read well. It's a lot of hats already. So then to put on top of that, oh, now you're responsible for the relationship, the commercial, doing all of the health checks, making sure you're, preparing for your next account review. That's a lot for one person to do. And I think spreading the skill set, spreading the load is just, it makes for a healthier kind of collaboration, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then to pick up on the skill side of things, I think that's a really interesting part to, like you said, take a technical thing and be able to condense it and recontextualize it and reframe it and make it digestible to somebody who is not a specialist in that subject. Do you think there is value in, I guess, from both sides, the technical leads and specialists doing maybe some training on like communication skills, and or the account management side having a bit more technical knowledge and being more understanding of what is going into that process as well?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we need a depth of each other. So AMs don't need a technical depth of knowledge where we can, do a technical audit or do our own research or anything like that. But we need enough that we can talk to our clients about it. We know who to involve when. We understand the subject matter, but also that we can recognize opportunities. If we're listening to a client call and it sounds like, oh, there might be an opportunity there, we can say, oh, well, that might be something we could help you with. Let me connect you with Brendan or Jack or Tom or whoever it is in the team. We need to be able to understand it and recognize it. And flip side as well with the SEOs, you don't necessarily need to be a master in communication in a setup like this where you've got a client partner, but you need a commercial awareness to be able to, I suppose, map your work to business outcomes and business in why does it matter? That's the thing where when we do big account reviews, reporting, I'm often asking the team to ask themselves, or I will literally be saying to them, why does this matter? Why does this matter to our goals? How does it feed into them? How does it help? So if they can do that, then we have enough respect and understanding for each other's roles that it works and we're not overlapping.
Like you said, there can be overlap there, and I know I've had conversations with Hannah and Elliot here before, working on accounts of them before, where they all have a question that is so integral to how the client would see it, but something I would never have thought of. And they'll just be like, so how does that work? And I'm like, I don't really thought about how that works, actually. That's a good point. Let me think about that. And like actually, coming in with a fresh perspective. And like you said, having a base knowledge of what fundamentally what works. Like we're not suddenly going to be like, let's do a bunch of keyword stuffing and be like, hold on a minute, what? Like, literally talking to somebody the other day who works in house, and they got an audit from an agency, and I was like, they were like, would you mind having a look at this for me? It's my first time working with an agency externally. Like, sure, let's have a look. And I was like, okay, normal stuff, keyword research, primary keyword, secondary, tertiary keywords, whatever, cool. And then I got to the keyword density, and I was like, okay, strike one, cool, yeah, that's not relevant anymore. And then next one, it was like, yeah, okay. Then it was, how many characters should the article be? And I'm like, have you ever thought about how many characters an article should be? And they were like, no. I was like, neither does Google. Google doesn't care.
Yeah.
That has been proven over and over again that is not
Yeah.
a thing. For me, having those like basic fundamental knowledge, and like, again, for me, having a basic, like you said, communication skills, right? The SEO specialist or the digital PR specialist, whatever, still needs to be able to have a conversation about that thing. You
Yeah.
can't just be, unfortunately, fully introverted and just be like, I'm going to do the work and then I just push it over to you and I just don't talk to anyone. You still need that little bit of conversational kind of skills there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes into report writing as
Yes.
well. Like you're doing that and then presumably you're presenting those when we have things like annual account reviews, all the teams involved with that. And you should be able to talk about your area of expertise and how that's contributed to the accounts and, have an opinion on that and be able to talk about that. Yeah. But I wouldn't expect you to then, navigate the whole budgeting review process and go and speak to somebody in procurement about how we renew on our terms like that. I just don't, I wouldn't expect that level, but you need to be able to have a rapport with the client yourselves as well. And it's that kind of overlap that complements each other in the same way that we need enough knowledge that we're not coming to you asking for briefs of how do we stuff these keywords, and then when we do that, how long should the article be? Like that's not a good use of anybody's time. If I can't field that and I'm wasting time coming to you with it, like that is not an ideal setup. And that's where I think that's like an example of where I think account management can get a really bad rep, of where we're just passing things from the client to the specialist and not being able to interpret that and field that ourselves. Actually, if we're able to do that, it makes your life way easier, because we're taking it off your desk and we are the communication experts. So we can diplomatically say, really good idea, but we're not we're not going to do that. And you can kind of gently reframe things without it even coming into your SEO hours.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really interesting kind of perspective on the long-term goals as well, right? I mentioned earlier, like, and you just mentioned the annual review process, which I think is such a integral part of understanding long-term perspectives and long-term goals and stuff like that. How do you go about, I guess, in that early part of that relationship, crafting a roadmap for success with that client, with the specialist and the account manager working together? What does that kind of relationship look like when it comes to building a long-term roadmap? You hopefully, fingers crossed, you're working with this client for months, if not years into the future, right?
I think it comes down to a really detailed onboarding kind of process. And we use onboarding like interchangeably as well. But what I mean by that is, you do all of the kind of commercials, all of the agreements, you find out how the business are going to work together, but then you have your stakeholder interviews, you go through brand guidelines, their audience, competitors, how they make money, how the business functions, who is going to have an active role on the account, what they need, what reporting looks like for them, all of that kind of fact-finding exercise. And at the end of that, you should be able, like, all of that stuff is going to feed into the work that we do in terms of auditing and strategy, but we should all have a plan that meets everybody's needs and gives us something that is very objective that we can refer back to. So that if somewhere in that long-term relationship, sometimes around that 6 to 8 month mark, when your results aren't necessarily coming in yet, because we know it's a long-term investment, but maybe it's not even our client, maybe it's their leaders, and they're sort of saying, what is it that we're working towards here? Having a strong onboarding process and a strong kind of foundation where we've had that strategy, it gives us something that we can come back to and go, remember, this is what we're working towards, and what we're doing right now feeds into it like this, and then what we'll expect to see in 6 months' time looks like this. It's a really nice framing piece. But if you don't spend that upfront time getting to know each other and literally writing down what everybody's expectations are and how we get there, those conversations can become really tense really quickly, because you don't have an objective thing to go, we all signed off on this because we believed in this. It kind of is a bit, it can get tense really quickly. So yeah, a really strong onboarding, transparent process, outlining what the pain points are, trying to get ahead of them, and baking all of that into your plan that you can keep referring back to assess progress, I think would be key.
I think that is a real kind of, again, kind of key element that a lot of us don't think about when it comes to the onboarding process, is having that initial perspective and initial review, and then regular check-ins. We mentioned the annual review, but I am very aware that, the client partner is actually not just checking that once a year, right? That would be crazy. But for me, like in previous experiences, like you mentioned, setting expectations being, I think, one of the most important things from my bad experiences previously. Like going in, I would be part of the pitching and proposal stages, and then, I would be sat there as the specialist, and the person doing the pitch would be like, oh yeah, we can do this. And I'm sat there like, can we? You sure about that? Do you want to talk about it? Like, okay, yeah, we've just promised that. Cool. Yeah, I guess I'll just nod and smile and hope for the best. Like, oh yeah, great. That's a lot of work. Okay, yeah, that's my like problem to deal with now. And then 6 months you're having that conversation of like, didn't you promise that when you came and did the proposal? I'm like, yeah, we did. Don't know why, but yeah, we did. And I think it's a very like positive thing here, where, like you said, we have those regular check-ins. You don't just do expectation setting, but also expectation management as well. So like that ongoing process of having those kind of conversations where, like you said, you bring the end of like, and that feeds into this thing. And I know this is something you brought up, funny enough, in our end of year review for Candour as well, which I thought was really interesting, was the perspective of, client churn and the length of client partnerships and stuff like that, right? I think you said 6 months, or even maybe the first like 3 months, 3 to 6 months is the most common like period for churn.
Yes.
Is that like, is it fairly self-explanatory, or is there more into it than that? Do you think that, like you said, you don't necessarily get the results straight away, or is there, I guess, like, why is that first 6 months so important for mitigating that churn and maintaining those long-term relationships?
I think it is largely expectation and alignment. Yeah, I think it's those three things. I think it's expectations around what they thought they were going to have. And I don't even necessarily mean just in terms of the results. Obviously, that's a big one. That's what makes the money. But actually, it can be in terms of output. They thought it was going to look like this, or they thought maybe their understanding was slightly different of what an audit would achieve for them. And they thought they were going to get masses out of an audit. But actually, it was something that we needed to do to check there wasn't anything wrong there before we move on. And I've had some curious expectation kind of around that auditing and what that would achieve for them. So it can happen with outputs, it can happen with long-term results, but yeah, that is a major factor, I think, in churn, that they just pictured something slightly different in their mind, and even though internally we believe we're on the right course, those things aren't marrying up. So that's one. I think trust is the other thing as well. You know, we haven't yet had that time to build up a partnership, and we don't have years worth of data, and we haven't launched any campaigns yet, so we haven't got that test case of, well, remember the last campaign we did and we were all a bit unsure because it took a little while to turn around, but then we got like 100 links from that, and that was amazing. We don't have anything like that, so we're asking the client to just trust in us at the same rate where they are investing in an agency that they don't know all that well. They're investing in results that haven't yet come to fruition. That's a big trust kind of gap there. So that's important. There's a lot of work that the client partnership team do around that to support lots of informal check-ins, lots of more kind of formal reporting things, but that's a big one. And yeah, trust does not always grow at the same rate as an agency spending does. I know that it's a long-term thing. So that can be a challenge. And I think the third one that we've seen, again, if you've got a really solid onboarding process, you can kind of get around this. But the third area is not understanding fully the limitations or the blockers and things on client side. And sometimes that's actually not like an oversight of onboarding. It isn't because we didn't ask, because sometimes the client doesn't know. And we'll come to it with
You
like,
don't know until you know.
Exactly. We'll come to it with like great intentions, and then the copywriter left and we can't get anything done. Or actually, someone else somewhere in the business that sits outside of SEO has decided that, there's a whole bunch of dev work that needs to take priority. That has to happen. We've seen it before with clients where, actually the core infrastructure of their site in terms of how it handles inquiries, or how it drives quotes, whatever that might be, that needed a complete overhaul, and we've been brought on board and there's a lot of on-site stuff that we need to do. Can't be. And we didn't understand that, and that kind of alignment can be a bit of an issue sometimes, and that can lead to churn, where actually the client maybe didn't understand how this on-site stuff or the actual implementation of content was kind of integral to success. And to us, that's inherently obvious. But if you're not an SEO, if you haven't worked with an agency before, maybe they didn't quite get how, actually, if we're not implementing anything, how could the results come? And that's just, I have had that before, and you think, how did we get here? But I think a combination of that kind of expectations, we didn't get their resource limitations, they didn't get their resource limitations, and there's no trust to say we'll just see this bit through it. That kind of recipe can lead to early churn, I've found.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think there's that real kind of, like you said, I love sometimes the client doesn't even know what's going to be a problem until it's a problem. And the example of the copywriter leaving is a literal example of account you and I worked on a few years ago. Real life examples. And there are those little things of like just stuff you can't factor in, you can't think of. But I think you're absolutely spot on. Having that overall goal and the real kind of solid foundation is what allows you to do that from the onboarding going on forward, to mitigate that kind of stuff. Okay, we lost the copywriter, we can pivot and do this instead, or we can, one of our team can pick up this area, or whatever it is. Different ways of doing that. There is a real kind of, I guess, kind of a skill in a way of like understanding what could go wrong as well, right? Even onboarding is mostly about like learning about the client and all that kind of thing. But you mentioned like the particular questions you asked there. Where are bottlenecks? Like, do you have any big things coming up? I've had it before where a client was like, I think it was like 2.5, 3 months in. It was like, by the way, we're fully rebranding everything. I'm like, you didn't want to mention that when we had a reporting call like 2 weeks ago. Like, you didn't want to mention that when we onboarded, and we've spoken twice. Let alone again the conversations you've been having with the account management team. You only just, oh yeah, it happens next week. I'm like, right, okay.
Yeah, we love a surprise rebrand. Why have I had so many of those in my career?
You really have, yeah.
Yeah, but again, I think that comes down to understanding of how everything connects together. Quite often, when I've had a surprise rebranding happen to me, it's because that sits in a branding team who had some goals, and the rebrand will absolutely deliver upon those goals. But it's kind of, well, brand don't do SEO and vice versa. So why would you know about that? And that is quite often the feedback I've had of, why did nobody tell us? Well, it's got nothing to do with what you're doing. It's like, actually, it really does. And that's a hard, I'm not just saying onboarding fixes everything. It's a hard thing to do. But the more stakeholder interviews you can have early on, and the more you can kind of have confidence in asking those questions around, what are people's understanding? Who else is a stakeholder here? What else are they working on? And kind of, try and get a feel for stuff, even though it's not directly within your remit. If nothing else, just so that you can understand that it's happening and respect it. But that can be a challenge. I've definitely worked with clients who are a bit like, that's not your remit. You don't need to know. Don't kind of touch that. And then you get a surprise project. But we work around it.
Yeah, that's something funny enough. That was kind of the theme of the podcast. I want to say it's 2024, pretty much, was kind of like SEO needs to not be a silo in and of itself. And that is so true from us as specialists, whether that's agency or in-house or whatever. But that's also true, exactly as you're saying there, from the client's perspective and their understanding it as well. Oh, that does affect SEO in this way. Or, oh, I didn't even know you did paid. Why aren't we having a conversation with the paid team right now? And I've literally had that example where I think the paid team were building landing pages that were like literally cannibalizing the organic side of things. And I'm like, why aren't we having these conversations? Why are two different people building two different pages on the same site for the same purpose, essentially? And so much of that, like you said, is that how many people can you get in the room at the same time? Or even, progressive conversation. You don't have to have necessarily everyone there, but the more different sides of, okay, have you worked with an agency before? I think is a really interesting question that, like I said, I've spoken to people in-house and freak out as soon as they get an external agency involved. They think ironically, all their agency will be taken away from them because suddenly the agency is doing all that stuff. Does that kind of thing factor in a lot to the onboarding process when you're thinking about, this client has never worked with an agency like us before? Or is it kind of quite nice if they do, we've had examples where I guess their person has moved companies and they've taken us with them as well, which is quite nice. I was like, us, you've already got that trust, right? Is there an extra layer there if they've never worked with an agency before? There's that maybe a bit more difficult to gain that trust in that way as well.
Yes, I think it can be more challenging. I think definitely in the later years, a lot of our clients at Candour are much more mature. Just in terms of how long they've been going.
Immature clients as well.
Yeah, in terms of how long they've been around. They've worked with other agencies. They have a kind of quite a strong grasp on their marketing kind of goals, what they want to achieve with search and so on. So it does happen less, but yeah, I've absolutely worked with clients where we are their first agency. And I think there's been, in my experience, clients have not kind of always wanted to be that forthcoming around kind of vulnerabilities and where their knowledge gap starts. And that can be a real problem because we're all acting on assumption that you know what it's like to work with an agency and that when I'm presenting you this report, you understand what that means. But clients maybe don't want to say that they don't fully understand that. And yeah, that's just creating a really uneven ground to move forward on. I think the other thing that can be a challenge when you work with clients who've never worked with an agency before, again, in my experience, is sometimes they think that you're going to do everything. So we've brought an agency on to do SEO, will be how it's kind of sold to them. So they're like, they're going to do the SEO. And I'm like, what we mean by that is we are going to do some research. We're going to come up with a strategy, but we very much need your help in implementing it. So you're going to have to write some things and you're going to have to publish it. And we can do digital PR, but you're going to need to give us quotes. We need a spokesperson. You need to publish the content that we're going to build links to. And it's like, oh, well, I thought you were doing that. And so that, misaligned expectations around owners and stuff. But fortunately, that seems less common. With our, compared to our current portfolio.
Yeah, I know you and I worked on a client a few years ago where we had like trying to get quotes from anyone involved was like blood from a stone, right? Like that is quite an integral part of like highlighting you as industry experts. Like that's quite an important part of it. And I've had examples before, like you said, where you get the kind of almost like a little batch of quotes that you can then use going forward. And perfect little digital PR moment. You can just do reactive, like, they've signed off on these quotes. You can just use them from now on. But like you said, so many people, if you don't have that, again, kind of what we're talking about with the relationship between the client partnership team and the specialist team, the foundational knowledge of how does this work? What do you need from me? What will I need from you? That two-way, arguably kind of three-way conversation there. I think that is a huge part of, what we do, onboarding and stuff. I know Brendan and Tom and the team do a lot of training with clients as well, literally upskilling clients so they're aware of what they're doing. So you can, we've hired a new whatever role. Oh, cool. We can work with that person to help them be a more positive contributor in the overall strategy. And I think a lot of agencies are very scared of upskilling their clients because they're like, well, if they have the skills and they don't need us kind of thing. But that's often like a really good position to be in, is to, work with that client for a long time, build up their knowledge and their base, and then see them grow, right? I always see it as a positive thing. I know a lot of agencies kind of freak out about that sort of thing. But
They do, yeah. It can be part of, I don't know, sometimes that can be a reflection of the success, right? That the business has kind of grown and that they're then in their next leg of what their strategy and growth looks like for them, and bringing, like one of the clients that we worked on for many years saw, not just from SEO, but SEO was definitely a big part of that. But, across their marketing strategy, saw long-term kind of sustained growth. The latter phase of our strategy was all around training and upskilling and preparing them for when we then hand over that strategy for them and they are delivering it. And I think that was a really nice experience because we still believed in the core strategy. It was just actually, we can take even more of this on. And we, over time, had them in for training sessions of how they do particular things, which tools they need, how they work them. And yeah, it was nice to kind of hand that over. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a bad experience. Obviously, we don't like seeing clients go, but if you are going to part ways, that has to be one of the nicer ways that it happens, right?
yeah, definitely. That's like, we've done the job so well, and there is that real, like you said, the long-term client we worked with. I know Mark has always sort of pitched it as like a very positive thing. He's done, some of our case studies have been about that element of actually they have worked with us for so long, they have had such success, and the team has grown. Now they have a whole in-house marketing team, and they don't need us. Like, congratulations, off you go. If you ever need, I know we still work, on consultancy basis and stuff like that. They might have little regular check-ins with Brendan or Mark or Tom or whoever it is. Just be like, can I just double check we're doing this right? Or like, can you just refresh this thing or make sure we're doing this thing? And I think that is a really, again, a kind of underestimated element of that is when you can have those little touch points and little ongoing relationships that aren't even necessarily your retainers and stuff like that. I think a lot of, like we said, a lot of agencies are so scared to even go down that route that, I was talking to Brendan the other day and he did some training here at the studio with a client that isn't a retainer client of ours. And he mentioned the name and I was like, I know those guys. They came to a Search Norwich like 6 months ago or whatever, 18 months ago now. And he mentioned a couple of the names, like, I remember chatting to those guys before. And having that kind of element of, oh yeah, we have a relationship with those guys that isn't necessarily, ongoing SEO or we didn't build their website or anything like that. but you can still have ongoing conversations, be part of that industry, those communities and stuff like that. And I think for me, that's a big part of why why we want to do something like Search Knowledge XL, why we've been highlighting so much of our, web design and build team and stuff like that. And exactly why I'm trying to do this series of conversations on the podcast is to highlight other members of the team to show that, it's not just our little pocket of SEO. We do so much other stuff as well. And I think a lot of us kind of see, again, living in the little SEO bubble, we don't give the credit and the thought to account managers, client partners, project managers, digital PR, all the other stuff that goes into it, and having no real perspective of like, what does the day-to-day look like for you compared to what it would look like for me? Because I don't really do much client work anymore, right? That's a weird thing as well, like trying to understand, I don't really do that much client. And that's a really common question people ask me. Like, do you still work on clients? Do you still do that? It's like, yes. I kind of want to make sure I'm still doing that a little bit to keep you kind of keep the fires warm a little bit, but not have it be the focus of the role, right? And I think that's a huge part of why we work so well as a team, because we've got such a diverse range of skills and people, and even within just the digital PR team or just the SEO team, there is a range of different skills there. Where you take someone like Terry, who is a brilliant writer, and then take Tom, who is building tools from scratch and all this kind of stuff. Two things that I would never be able to do. And I remember having this conversation with Elliot, who works on a client with me at the moment, and Terry did a content brief, like 3 or 4 content briefs. And I was like, I think that's the first time I've ever just went, no notes, absolutely nailed it, no problem, sorted. I was like, that's why you have specialists. That's why, like, me doing my little bits and pieces as an account lead is one thing, but actually, like, bringing in a content specialist to do the content makes so much more sense. And maybe, the client may never have a conversation with that specific specialist, but you've got the account manager, you've got the client partnership conversations happening that then bring that all together. And I think that's where a lot of the magic happens, really.
Yes, I think so. I think it is in the collaboration, isn't it? Bringing all the right people together to solve that, like, shared goal that we have with the client. The CP knows who's the right people to put on that brief.
Exactly. Let's round things off with some fun recommendations then, shall we? I like to end every episode, and I know I pre-warned is maybe a strong term, but I do this every episode, and I know it catches some people off guard. We're going to do a couple of cool things that are going to be, what is one actionable thing you'd recommend for the listeners and viewers to start doing today?
So for your specialist and your client partnership or account manager kind of collaboration to work, it's all built on kind of trust and mutual respect, right? And for that to keep working, I think you need to share that context and have that informal, this is what I'm thinking, this is what the client's thinking, here's how we're going to approach it. So it's a super straightforward, easy one that anyone can do. Take 10 minutes before a briefing, a key meeting, for that you respond to that spicy bit of feedback and agree, share each other's points of view and just listen and hear. I think it doesn't take long, 5-10 minute chat to just hear and collaborate each other's perspective, because it will be stronger when you've got that combined kind of opinion, skill, view.
I know that's something, again, talking to the client Elliot and I work on at the moment. We always have that 5-10 minutes before, whether it's a monthly call or whatever it is, to just chat through, like, hey man, how are you feeling about it? What's going on here? It's like, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to tell you, they did this. I'm like, oh right, okay. Oh yeah, I should update you on this as well. Like, I'm halfway through this task and that'll be done by then. It's like, you have that full picture, right? And like you said, the alignment is so key there that it can be just check in, people. Just have a nice little conversation.
Check in. That's all. Yeah. Spend some time listening to what your colleagues think. Make them feel more confident. You'll go in the call and be like, they were right. Listen.
So they're like cheering you on in the background. Yeah.
I believe in you, Brendan. Like, that's what we need.
I've definitely felt that sometimes, where I'm just like, sat and I'm like, go Jessica, go. Yeah, you tell that client. I'm like, yeah, like, again, if you're highlighting success that we've done or giving someone a shout out or defending, the specialist or championing the client, whichever direction you're going in, have those moments where it's like, Oh yeah, like that was a really like
Yeah,
powerful moment, a really like important moment in that
definitely.
conversation.
And it's not about like doubling up, you know. I don't necessarily, if I get some challenging feedback or I'm approaching something, a pain point in the relationship, it's not about me kind of outsourcing my thinking and going, what do you think? What should I reply? It's building on it. But I know that my response is better when I've also got the specialist considerations too, because of course, that argument's just more informed. If I go to my SEO specialist and say, what is your take on this? I usually get some extra kind of data and insight there. And then I can frame that in a way that gives it business context and makes it commercially viable. You're stronger together, people.
Okay, next recommendation is a piece of software or a tool you've been using recently. Anything you think maybe people might not know about?
This is a tricky one for me because obviously I'm not using any SEO tools. I'm maybe one of your first guests that isn't going to be able to talk about this
I think
kind
it's
of thing.
particularly interesting for that reason. Like you're not going
Yeah.
to mention Ahrefs or Screaming Frog or
No,
whatever and all that kind of stuff.
never.
Like
That's so off brand for me. No, I wouldn't. And I mostly live in our project management software, right? Um, but regardless of what you use, we use Scoro, which is brilliant for planning, task management. But it's also really good because it's not quite like a CRM, but we can store all that client information in there. But regardless of the platform you use to manage kind of workflows and clients, the thing I would say is have a like dedicated kind of space for that context and that client information. And one of the things that we're doing is like client partnerships is always feeding back like health checks, vibes, big commercial kind of milestones that are coming up, that ad hoc feedback that we get. You know, so even when our specialists aren't present for those informal status calls, or they know that the copywriter's left, or actually we've just got wind that budgets might change for better or for worse in the next 6 months. So when we do our reporting, let's maybe amp up this bit. Let's talk about this opportunity. That context is shared. So somewhere where you have whatever tool it is you're using, as well as the deliverable and the task management, just make a space that you can have that informal chatter about what is going on and kind of take yourselves out of the weeds of it a little bit. Really helpful for kind of like that scene setting, and yeah, especially if you're preparing for a big milestone.
I love that. Yeah, I remember when I first joined, we were talking about the client info sheets we had. We were doing it in like literally on Google Sheets at the time. And then, like you said, being able to integrate that into project management software and add those little notes of like, the head of marketing will be on holiday for 2 weeks, so nothing will get done. Like tiny little things like that, that isn't an email, isn't really an important thing that needs to be, discussed in depth, but just make a note of, oh yeah, their copywriter has got a new job or whatever it is. Little things like that where you can just pay attention to, like you said, vibe check everything and just be aware of it and have those informal conversations and a record of them. Because for me, it was always that thing of like, oh, we definitely said something last month. I can't remember what we talked about. We agreed on it, right? I can't remember what we talked about. Wait, why don't we just go and read the thing? Like, we wrote down what we talked about, so you can go and read it. Like,
Exactly. It's so helpful for that business context, but also, I think when I'm leaving those updates and those notes, like I'm setting my specialist up for success, because I can't say to them, "Oh, make sure when you're reporting, you're keeping that commercial context, you're keeping that key business area that we know is a bit behind target in mind," if I don't tell you any of that. So I'm helping you tell the best story that you can with the data and the reporting tools by giving you that context and telling you what the client is worrying about. We can address that together. So yeah, as long as there's somewhere to share that information, it's just yeah, success and knowledge on both sides.
and let's finish with something fun. What have you been enjoying recently? Not SEO or project management, account management, anything like that. What have you been enjoying recently, Jessica?
This is my moment to talk about Wuthering Heights, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I was torn about whether I should talk to you about this because it's getting some very mixed reviews, and I think the majority are a thumbs down review.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, understandably, there are a lot of deviations from the book. So lots of people that love the book feel it's not great. There's various other things, but I really enjoyed it. And that might be basic, but you know what? It is nice to just have some aesthetic joy. And I don't just mean Jacob Elordi. I mean that I mean the outfits and the filmmaking and what went into that. Very aesthetically pleasing. I would say that the romance to heartbreak ratio, without any spoilers, is perhaps underrated.
Interesting.
So if you were going to go, take some tissues and be prepared to
Not for that
sob.
other reason.
Take tissues because you'll cry.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was great. Slated in the reviews. I have also read the book, so I have done both. I can say I'm not one of those loved the film because I didn't read the book. I did both. I liked both. And yeah, even though it's got terrible reviews, I liked it. And it's okay to like things even if they are a bit naff and don't technically follow the original source. But that's why it's Wuthering Heights.
Adaptations of things, especially something that has been adapted so many times. Like, I'll ask you in a minute if you've seen other versions of Wuthering Heights, because there's been so many over the years. But that's what makes different versions interesting. If every single one is just, here's the book, but with slightly different actors. Here's the book, but with a new cast. Here's a book, but, oh, it's exactly the same. Like, I've always find it interesting when you can take, to go completely off on a weird tangent here, but like, take something like, oh, did you know Lion King is basically Hamlet? You're like, what? Like, yeah, it's basically Hamlet. Like, structurally, it is a retelling of Shakespeare. But nobody thinks about that.
No, they don't.
But that's a really interesting perspective. Like, so many things like, that's kind of a retelling of this as a redoing of that. And even if it's not literally called Wuthering Heights, like, it can be a similar structure. It can be an adaptation. Oh, there's an animated version. Oh, there's this, there's that. Have you seen other versions? Is this your
No.
favourite version?
It's the only version
interesting.
I've seen. Because of all the hype, you couldn't not.
Yeah.
You might not have seen her, so you couldn't not. But yeah, it's because of all of the hype. It's a big cultural moment. So yeah, it's the only one. Had to go and see it. Had to find out if those 1-star reviews had anything. Yeah, it's getting a lot of hate, but regardless of whether you liked it or you didn't, and it's fine if people don't, but it doesn't have to mean that it's bad. It's just not for you. That's my only gripe with the reviews. People categorically being like, it is bad. Fine if it's not for you. I thought it was great. It's nice to just have a chill time and enjoy something.
Yeah, definitely. We need more of that in life, right?
Exactly. We do need more of that. And yeah, regardless of whether you enjoyed it or not, I do think what an amazing thing to have done, to have read that book, thought, this is how I pictured it. I'll make a film. So much work went into it. Like, even in, I don't know if you've seen in the opening credits, the animation with the hair.
Oh, right, yeah.
You know how Victorians used to keep hair and things. There's a thing in the book about keeping the hair in the locket. They had intertwined, and it's actually Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi's real hair, as well as like fake hair, but it uses parts of theirs. And just that animation is just hours and hours of work for that squiggle at the beginning. Whether you like it or not, you have to respect the work and the craft that's gone into it. And I got enjoyment from that alone. So yeah, that's my thing. That's my thing. Chosen just over by Harry Styles. There's a lot of other, if you'd have got me weeks later, it would have been the new series of Euphoria. I have no doubt.
Euphoria's coming back. Oh my God, yeah.
2 days time.
Yeah.
So it was, but it had to be the one I picked.
Nice. Well, folks, go and check out Wuthering Heights if you want to have that experience. If you haven't checked it out already, go and read the book as well.
Yes, read the book. Do both. Compare them.
Yeah, I know we were talking about before we started recording, but it's really interesting to go back and read stories from that long ago. And like, I think you were saying, like, half the characters basically have the same name and stuff like that, right?
Same name. A lot of same name, inconsistent language. It's a hard book to read. Yeah. Grown up Kathy, baby Kathy, 2 Heathcliffs. Everyone's last name is the same. But it's worth doing.
Exactly. Go and check out Wuthering Heights. This is a recommendation. Go and check out Wuthering Heights. Books, films, whatever it is, go and check it out. Where can people follow you, Jessica? If you want to keep up with what you're up to in general, talking about, I know you work with an amazing charity called Brave Futures that do amazing work. They were our charity of the year 2 years ago, doing amazing work. And yeah, what you're up to on social media and things like that.
I mean, I'm really bad at social media. I am. I'm so inconsistent on LinkedIn, but you can find me there. And once in a blue moon, I might post something, usually about how amazing our team are and celebrating some efforts that somebody's done. Most recently, all of the great place to work stuff, which I was really proud of. So I'm inconsistent, but I'm there lurking, so people can find me there.
Nice. Inconsistent but lurking.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.